So you're considering a lifelong career in the trades. After all, you spend enormous amounts of time, possibly, considering other career activities, options, potentials, and, well, quite frankly, you've kind of come up short. They have come up short, they have been unfulfilling, and many of them did not promise the rewarding job, and certainly the pay, that you expected. Never mind the fact that you've possibly gone through the motions of the cultural hazing, which is you got to go to college to get a good job. You're embarking on a journey that many of us have known for a long time now, that this is another viable option. So welcome. On today's podcast episode, we are going to explore some tips and some things that are going to help you out, especially starting out and definitely long term. So let's get to it. All right, so tip number 1. As you are building up your reputation, because believe me, I am telling you today, after 23 years in this, and I'm an ironworker by trade, this sounds simplistic, and indeed it is. You show up to work, you do a good job, you get paid, and then you go home. But the problem remains. After having run work as long as I have, I can tell you that attendance has been a significant problem. Now, this isn't a blanket statement. There are people who show up every day and do their job to the best of their ability. Those are the people, especially for those of you getting into this trade, that you are going to want to watch. You're going to want to learn from that person. You're going to want to learn that habit, quite frankly. And you're going to want to be influenced by that particular mindset. But so often is the case that when younger people or newer people get into the trade, one bad apple ruins the bunch. One person with a bad attitude, with a lousy attendance record, they oftentimes is the case, influence somebody to become like them, as opposed to just coming to work and doing what you're supposed to do. So to that end, tip number 1 by far is don't lay out. Come to work every single day, ready to go to work. You got a bad attitude? No one cares. I mean, if I'm being honest here, no one cares. What they want you to do is come to work and be ready to work and do a good job. So number 1, don't lay out. You will be surprised. And I'm just going to warn anybody that's coming into the trade, or if you got a couple years in and you think, okay, well, I'm listening to this podcast episode and maybe I need to change, the way I think about this. You are actively building a reputation every day on the job. And it takes a long time, just like in a relationship. It takes a long time to, build up that reputation, to build that trust up. But it doesn't take long to erode that trust and dismiss it totally. And you can build that reputation up first and foremost by showing up on the job. Don't lay out. Don't miss days of work. Make it so that if you are not at work and you have not called in already, that their first thought is, well, there he is, the layout artist has not come to work, par for the course. Make them think something's not right because this just isn't like him or this just isn't like her. They're always here at work. Something isn't right. That's building a reputation. That's using a work ethic that you have. So tip number 1, first and foremost, don't lay out. Tip number 2, and this is a sister to coming in and, don't lay out, be punctual or if you prefer, be on time. Be on time. Now, I operate underneath the premise that early is on time. I get to work a little early because I like to leave myself with a little bit of buffer in case of, well, traffic or something else happens. I forgot something that I have to come back home and pick it up to turn around and go back to work. If I've left myself enough time as a buffer, then I don't have to sweat having to call somebody every single time that something like that happens because I've built in enough. Now, where I live, we have a significant amount of traffic. It's horrible, if I'm being honest. And yet, I try to build about 20 to 25 minutes of what I would say is a buffer. If there's a slowdown, if there's an accident, I've got 20 to 25 minutes. Anything more than that is just something that it's not an act of God, but it's something that's beyond, kind of preparing for it to a degree. If I lived in an area where it took a 45-minute buffer, then that's what I would have to prepare for because that's where I'm living at and that's where the work is, etc. Indeed, I was talking to apprentices just the other day where they were talking about how they are arriving somewhere around the job site at least an hour earlier so they could find a place to park. That's what they have to do. And that's just what it is to be on the job in some spaces, in some places. And so when I say be punctual, build yourself up. First off, tip number 1, don't lay out. Number 2, be on time. Give yourself a buffer, if you will, of time. Because no matter what, if you are what we call a minute man, you're just getting to work at 6:59 and your start time is at 7, or you're getting there at 7:01. This will come to bite you. That you will come to regret not actively embodying what I say is the principle of micro decisions. I have seen so many people that are terminated because of their attendance and or punctuality, being late, and then they get mad at other people, the people that either let them go or fire them or dismiss them, and then they get mad at those people, but they don't turn around and look at themselves in the mirror and say, this is on me. This is on me because I did not do what I was supposed to do, which is get to work on time. And in a month's time, you can say that person might have been late 5 or 6 times. That's a bit crazy, especially if you have not built up a level of experience and a reputation of being a very hard worker with a lot of experience to boot. They come together as a package. Plan accordingly and be at work on time. That's tip number 2. Tip number 3. Don't overestimate your value. Don't be an arrogant person. Here's what I mean by that. We are seeing a influx of people come into the building trades, and many of you came from let's say a trade school, right? And caveat, you don't need to go to a trade school. If you have a registered apprenticeship program that you can get into, go do that first. You won't need trade school, I promise you, and you're going to save yourself thousands of dollars. But if we've gotten a hold of you, or you've come into, let's say, an apprenticeship program, or you're trying to get into a trade and you've come from a trade school, don't let that little bit of experience that you think that you might have hinder you from being taught even more in the field. Because the reality is you don't know what you don't know. And when it comes to the trade, the teeniest little morsel. A lot of times it's from welding, but you don't know. And if you're arrogant and you're being an actor or an actress and you're playing the part as if you do know and you're trying to learn that way, that burns a lot of energy. And it's on shaky ground that you walk, because no one wants to try and teach anybody when you're an arrogant person, no one wants to teach you that. No one wants to try to teach you different things because you come off as unteachable. So don't overestimate your own value. When you're new to this, you don't know anything. It's not a problem. That's what you're there for. That's what you're there as a younger person, to come into the trade and learn. So you don't know. So don't overestimate your value if you have a little measure of skill, because it will hinder your chances or the teaching moments and your learning capacity to a degree. I've seen it happen. That's number 3. Number 4, don't be afraid to ask questions. There's an old saying that if 30 people are in a room and one person is bold enough to raise their hand and ask a question, at least 2/3 of the people in that room had the same question. They just never asked it. In all the job sites that I've been on throughout my entire career, if you don't ask the questions, somebody might assume that you already know. Don't be afraid then to admit that I just don't know. I'll be honest with you, it's actually a very freeing thing. I don't have to pretend like I know everything. And after 23 years in, I don't know everything. And so when you are able to say, listen, I'm unsure of this, could you show me or walk me through or tell me how you would do it? You catch more flies with honey than vinegar. And so don't be afraid to ask questions and to admit when you don't know something. There's a burden that you don't want to carry on. And it'll help you out when you are teachable in that regard. And number 5, which may actually be the most important for longevity in the trades, develop a sense of resiliency. Develop yourself to be resilient as possible. You cannot control what other people say to you. You cannot control what other people do to you. Whether they're talking bad about you, whether they fail to teach you, whether they are setting you up for failure. But the one thing that you have that's within your power to control is how you respond to that. So to that end, my word of advice to you, young man, young woman coming into the trades, is to develop a sense of resiliency. You don't have to respond to every single thing that someone says to you negatively. You don't even have to respond to that when somebody says something to you in a positive way. You don't have to do that. But control yourself and develop your resiliency so that you can let things just slide or let things go or de-escalate, as we like to say when it comes to, let's say, people within authority. We want to de-escalate. Develop yourself and your sense of resiliency. I assure you that it will be beneficial for you in the long run. You are not going to get along with every single person that you're going to interact with on the job site. It's not possible. We might say that we're not going to get along with other trades. But let's take it even further. You're not going to get along with every single person in your trade. So to that end, you can either A, possess a small amount of emotional maturity and fly off the handle at every single thing that somebody does wrong, which means, and the result of that then is, of course, going to be a continual job rotation for you, along with a host of other problems. Or you can develop a level of emotional intelligence and grow your resiliency to the point that you know that you don't have to respond to every single thing someone says, every single thing someone does. You're able to de-escalate situations, and I can assure you that this is helping you build your reputation for the better. And that's the truth of the matter. So develop your resiliency. All right? So here are the 5 tips as a recap that we just went over in this episode. Number 1, don't lay out. Sounds super simple, but I am telling you now, if you just come to work, you would be surprised just how much of a reputation builder it is. On the heels of that, be on time. Build into your daily routine a buffer so that you can make a stop at the store or whatever the case may be, dealing with traffic, finding a place to park, whatever it happens to be. Be on time. Build that in. Number 3, don't overestimate your value. Don't be an arrogant person. Be a humble person who's teachable, always wanting to learn. Don't act like you know it all. Number 4, don't be afraid to ask questions. When you have questions that are legitimately about the job, don't be afraid to ask them. Say, hey, how would you do this? How have you done this in the past? I'd like some tips and tricks and pointers if you don't mind. You get more flies with honey than vinegar, as the saying goes. And number 5, and again, what I think is probably one of the most important for longevity, is build your resiliency. You're going to hear some things on the job that you're not going to like. They may even be directed at you. You can't control everything that goes on around you in your situation, even though there are plenty of people who actually try and do that. It's impossible. But what you can control is the way that you happen to respond to things. That's an important distinction to make. And I want to make sure that's quite clear. And there they are, the 5 tips this podcast episode covered. If you have one that you think I might have missed, maybe we'll do another podcast episode. Feel free to drop me a comment or send me an email from the thewealthyironworker.com website and let me know. Thanks for listening. Stay safe out there on the job site.